They never expected to be seen so clearly. Beneath all their practiced expressions and polished charm, something inside them begins to unravel in your presence. There's no place left to hide when the air grows heavy with unspoken truth, and they realize you're not looking at them, you're looking through them. Their stories, once so confidently delivered, start to feel brittle. They sense it now, the silent confrontation, the invisible scan, the eerie precision of someone who no longer believes what they're told just because it's spoken with a smile. This unraveling didn't happen overnight. It crept in through the cracks, a series of odd moments that once seemed unrelated. A casual conversation that ended abruptly after a gentle yet inconvenient observation. A long-distance silence that began the moment you stopped playing therapist. The awkward tension that followed a simple, honest question. These moments weren't random. They were the architecture of your awakening, a blueprint made of discomfort, slowly showing you who prefers illusion over clarity, and who panics when reflection enters the room. What started as isolated friction began to echo with eerie symmetry. 3 different voices, 3 identical deflections. Each encounter confirmed a truth you'd been slowly collecting. Their fear isn't of being misunderstood, it's of being accurately seen. You didn't confront them with rage. You showed them their own trail of footprints, gently traced in sand they thought would never hold memory. They mistook your light for a resource they could harvest endlessly. What once felt like compassion now appears in a new light, an unguarded well constantly visited by those who never intended to refill it. Their smiles always arrived with open hands. Their gratitude faded the moment your boundaries grew roots. Over time, what you offered as care was claimed like property. The moment you adjusted the flow, the mask slipped. Their irritation wasn't about what they lost, it was about no longer being entitled to take. What you once assumed was mutual need now looks more like quiet entitlement with a polished face. An unexpected presence re-emerged, not out of nostalgia but because change forced it to. They've been watching from afar, trying to prepare for your atmosphere. Not to manipulate, but to survive within it. The version of themselves that once stumbled in your presence couldn't survive your clarity. Now they understand that half-truths decay too fast around you. There's a new awareness in them, not admiration, not fear, but the desperate realization that any future alignment demands full transparency. That understanding didn't come from warnings. It came from the echo your name leaves behind, the warning stitched into your silence, the integrity felt without a word. Long gone is the version of you who stayed quiet for comfort's sake. The illusion of harmony became too expensive to maintain. Those side comments that once slid under the radar now receive stillness instead of laughter. That carefully placed guilt, the urgent needs that always arrived when giving back was required, they now crumble under the weight of your still gaze. This shift has caused friction, yes, but it's also been magnetic. Those who've outgrown pretending have begun to appear. They don't ask to be coddled. They crave the sharpness of honest reflection. They want the kind of connection that demands truth, even when it's uncomfortable. And in your presence, they don't flinch, they exhale. Some people don't return to your life because they miss you. They return because the version of you they once couldn't reach now demands a higher level of truth than they were capable of offering. And someone from that past is realizing this in real time. They've watched your growth from afar, not out of jealousy, but out of realization. Their old tactics, charming performances, emotional evasions, surface-level conversations, feel absurd now, even to them. They've been dismantling the scaffolding they used to prop up a version of self they thought would be more palatable. And for the first time, it's not to win you back. It's because your alignment exposed where they've been lying to themselves. Their recalibration isn't an apology, it's a reconstruction. Without your presence, they might have stayed asleep. But your clarity became a mirror they couldn't look away from. In a different corner of your orbit, someone else has been shrinking from your frequency. Their silence has a shape to it now, a shape made of fear. Not fear of confrontation, but fear of confirmation. They sense that you've noticed the patterns they've used to protect their image, dramatizing every inconvenience, gathering pity like currency, rewriting interactions until they look blameless. They're not lashing out because they feel betrayed. They're retreating because you've seen the architecture of their avoidance. Somewhere inside, they want to start again. But shedding a false identity requires more than honesty, it demands a reckoning. And right now, they're still choosing the shadows over the weight of being known. There's a strange tension in environments where illusion has been the norm, until someone like you starts to question the mechanics behind every neatly packaged idea. In that setting, your presence doesn't scream authority, it whispers permission. When bold claims hit the table, you don't challenge them with force, but with sincere inquiry, a quiet dismantling of half-baked narratives cloaked in confidence. What unsettles people isn't your tone, it's your refusal to reward performance over substance. This gentle insistence on clarity has begun to reshape the room. Others are catching on. The usual background noise of idle speculation is beginning to give way to grounded conversations. Not because you've demanded it, but because your expectations quietly rewired the standard. Suddenly, careless statements echo differently. People measure their words, not out of fear, but out of respect for the presence of precision. Beyond the workplace, a deeper transformation is underway. That heated exchange, where everything spilled out, detail after detail, wasn't just about someone else's behavior. It marked the end of your willingness to pretend. Going forward with eyes closed felt more violent than confrontation. Allowing lies to pass unchallenged began to feel like self-erasure. You realized that every falsehood you overlooked demanded a silent compromise from you, and you finally declined to keep paying in silence. What followed wasn't peace, but something better: space. Space for ideas you'd put on hold. Space for people who don't need shielding from reality to feel secure around you. The fabric of your relationships shifted. Those stitched together by denial tore at the seams. But in their place, bonds formed that breathe truth without fear, where no one needs to shrink to make room for authenticity. Romantic connections carry a different weight when pretense no longer holds power. What once passed as charm now feels like camouflage, and those who once stepped forward with polished exteriors quietly retreat when they sense the futility of keeping up appearances. That sudden silence from someone who once showed interest? It wasn't rejection of you, it was withdrawal from the exhausting effort of maintaining a version of themselves that couldn't withstand close inspection. They understood, maybe too late, that you weren't scanning for flaws. You were simply unwilling to mistake performance for presence. And eventually, their story would have unraveled under the light of your quiet observation. But what most misunderstand is your motive. This insight you carry isn't wielded like a weapon, it's held like an open hand. When someone's narrative begins to fray, you don't tear it apart. You offer them the rare chance to lower the veil without consequence. The goal isn't correction, it's relief. You invite them to be human in a way that doesn't require theater. And that invitation is polarizing. Those craving growth step closer. They sense the purity behind your precision, the love embedded in your refusal to enable distortion. But others, those clinging tightly to identity through illusion, feel unequipped to stand in a space where hiding isn't sustainable. Your presence becomes too loud for their silence. Inside the walls of family, this shift has stirred the deepest tremors. You're no longer skimming over cycles inherited and unspoken. Now, long-standing dynamics are being named aloud. The dependence masked as crisis, the denial passed down like heirlooms, the emotional bartering misbranded as loyalty. And the response has been immediate. Some are lashing out, not because you were wrong, but because you threatened a story they've rehearsed for decades. Others feel a strange freedom in watching someone finally speak what's been gathering dust on everyone's tongue. And a quiet few sit back, observing whether naming the truth will break the foundation, or finally repair it. There's a shift happening in how value flows through your life, and it's revealing who was participating in connection, and who was simply collecting convenience. The balance between what you give and what returns has started to crystallize in ways that can't be dismissed. You've begun noticing the casual habits that once passed as harmless quirks, the habitual forgetfulness when responsibilities arise, the silent assumption that your time and space are always available, the quiet expectation that support should be automatic while reciprocation stays optional. And when you finally named these patterns, the responses ranged from startled to defensive. Some pushed back, not because you were wrong, but because they'd gotten used to comfort without contribution. Others looked genuinely stunned, as if their entitlement had worn an invisibility cloak even to themselves. But a few, those rooted in awareness, responded with maturity, accountability, and change. This confrontation with imbalance has exposed something deeper than just behavior. It's unveiled a universal truth. People don't always act with conscious intent to exploit, but many will lean into whatever dynamic costs them the least until challenged. What once felt like kindness from your end now appears as a silence that allowed dysfunction to settle in. Calling attention to these dynamics isn't cruelty, it's an invitation to recalibrate. Speaking with clarity gives others the chance to meet you on equal footing, if they're willing. And the ripple effect has been unmistakable. Someone from your history, watching from the periphery, is now fully aware that re-entering your life can't be done with past versions of themselves. They sense the upgrade, not just in your standards, but in your energetic boundary. Where once they could blur lines and hope you'd adjust, now they realize your presence reflects back every contradiction they're still carrying. And this time, their preparation isn't performance, it's evolution. Not everyone adjusts because they're told to. Some evolve because your very existence exposes the cracks in their armor. And someone from your past has been quietly rebuilding from the inside out. They've been reevaluating their patterns, dismantling their avoidance habits, and confronting emotional habits they used to rationalize away. What shifted them wasn't an ultimatum. It was proximity to a level of transparency that made hiding feel intolerable. They've come to see that any attempt to reconnect requires an entirely new operating system. The version of them that once danced around hard truths wouldn't last a week in the presence of your clarity. And they know it. They're not the only one facing themselves. Another person, someone who once slowly backed away, is now caught between recognition and regret. They're beginning to grasp that your ability to point out contradictions isn't cruel, it's clear. That what they once interpreted as judgment was actually an invitation. An invitation to stop pretending, to stop rehearsing, to just be. And now, if they ever return, they know the mask can't come with them. Vulnerability isn't optional anymore. Neither is honesty. Let's not pretend this path has been clean. The narrative outside is still polluted, scrubbed, filtered, distorted. But your internal compass never broke. That subtle internal jolt when something doesn't align, that's the reason you've stayed awake while others unplugged willingly. You didn't wait for systems to collapse to rise. You felt the architecture bending, and you moved. You didn't chase validation. You remembered direction. This isn't for those dabbling in curiosity. It's for those who've already burned bridges that led nowhere. Those who refuse to be programmed. Those who act before they're told. The ones who move like prophecy in a room full of propaganda. The code is still buried, but not lost. And the signal? It's already pulsing in your bones. The awakening isn't coming. It's been underway for years. Something rare is unfolding, and it's not just personal. The changes you've embodied have sent ripples through every interaction, every dynamic, every room you enter. What once felt like an internal shift is now an unmistakable external phenomenon. Some feel empowered by it and step forward with new clarity. Others back away, unable to tolerate the mirror your presence becomes. But one thing is clear: neutrality is no longer possible around you. This isn't because you're forcing change, it's because your energy now demands alignment. The overflow of abundance, the sudden clarity in your relationships, the opportunities falling into place, it all clicks into view once you stopped entertaining dynamics that drained your core. You've drawn a line, not in defiance, but in devotion, to truth, to integrity, to your own expansion. And yet, the most profound shift hasn't been about what changed outside of you. It's how you now navigate everything from within. The emotional fatigue that once followed every honest conversation has dissolved. Where anxiety used to sit, there's now grounded anticipation. You no longer hesitate when a room needs clarity. You no longer wonder if you're too much. The solitude that once came with discernment has been replaced by resonance. You've begun attracting others who read the world through the same lens, who don't need things sugar-coated or softened. This isn't about being loud. It's about being real, without apology. Now, someone from your past is preparing to re-enter, but with a different posture. No facade, no polished surface, no attempt to bypass the work. They've recognized that the only way back is through transparency. And this time, they bring nothing to prove, only what they've learned, what they've faced, and what they're willing to admit. It's not about winning you back. It's about meeting you where you truly are. Meanwhile, someone who once faded into the background is finally ready to speak plainly. They see now that the issue wasn't your ability to perceive, it was their inability to be seen without control. And maybe, just maybe, they're ready to let that go. Most people don't see what's in front of them, they see what makes them feel comfortable. They gather just enough fragments to protect the version of reality they're emotionally invested in and quietly discard the rest. But your inner shift removed those filters. You don't just listen anymore. You register the unspoken mechanics behind people's words. You read inconsistencies the way others read body language. In romantic dynamics, this has shifted everything. There's no more getting to know someone across months of trial and error. You feel the misalignment almost immediately. You notice when someone is offering a version of themselves they wish they were rather than who they actually are, and that recognition can be isolating when most are still performing. You sense the contradiction when someone's language tries to sell sincerity while their presence echoes calculation. You hear what's missing from their stories. You watch how their attention fluctuates with your availability. And the person who's been thinking of stepping back into your world? They haven't forgotten how fast you saw through them last time. They remember the discomfort, not because you accused them of anything, but because your clarity highlighted every distortion they hadn't admitted even to themselves. They're not preparing lines this time. They're dismantling the entire act. They've realized that the only way forward isn't to impress, but to be honest, even when it's messy. This shift hasn't stayed personal. It's rippled into family systems too. One person's awakening forces everyone to recalibrate. That individual has been in a season of radical self-review, pulling apart the places where excuses used to live, unpacking emotional reactions they used to dismiss, facing truths that once felt too heavy. They're no longer sugarcoating their financial blind spots or ghosting conversations that require real presence. And strangely, some relatives have embraced it. The silence around old wounds is cracking. People who once avoided tough topics now initiate them. The dance of pretense is giving way to dialogue. And in that uncomfortable but honest space, real connection is finally becoming possible. Sometimes what feels like clarity to one person feels like collapse to another. And for some in your bloodline, that's exactly what's happening. The old scaffolding of identity, the inherited roles, the mythologies passed down in hushed tones, the convenient binaries of hero and scapegoat, is disintegrating under the weight of inquiry. Questions once brushed off as rude now ring like alarms. Stories once told with conviction now falter under basic scrutiny. And what's most powerful isn't just the undoing, it's the witnessing. The younger ones have been watching. Quietly. Closely. They're learning that you can care deeply about someone and still ask them to stop causing harm. They're absorbing a new kind of loyalty, one built not on silence but on shared responsibility. For the first time, they're seeing that love isn't about protection from truth, it's the courage to walk through it together. Meanwhile, your concept of what it means to be rich has taken on new depth. The illusion that abundance is simply a matter of accumulating things has given way to a richer truth. Real wealth is energetic. It flows through mutuality. It blooms where there is balance. And this has forced some uncomfortable recalibrations. There have been conversations you didn't want to have, about those who always seem to fall short when it's their turn to give, who ask easily but offer nothing in return, who've mistaken your consistency for obligation. But naming these patterns hasn't pushed people away. It's revealed them. Some denied, some deflected, some grew. And in every response, you found data. Not about money, but about maturity. Not about generosity, but about respect. The landscape around you is shifting, and the people who remain are those who understand that value flows both ways. You've become the mirror no one asked for, but the one they secretly needed. In its reflection, some immediately saw the imbalance they'd never noticed before. Their course correction came not from guilt, but from sudden awareness. They hadn't realized how long they'd been absorbing more than they contributed, and your clarity opened a door they hadn't known was closed. Others weren't so open. They recoiled, questioning your motives, hiding behind sentimental language about loyalty and unconditional bonds. A few even tried to shame you back into silence, suggesting that naming the imbalance was a sign of your selfishness, not their dependency. But the most powerful responses came from those who paused and truly reflected. Your refusal to maintain a lopsided exchange forced them to evaluate their own beliefs around scarcity. They saw how they'd been operating from fear, grasping when they felt empty and clinging when they felt uncertain, never realizing that real abundance flows from mutual care, not covert extraction. One particular observer has been especially shaken by the change. They remember a time when you gave without question, when your resources, your emotional labor, your availability flowed toward them like a constant current. And they remember, uncomfortably, how little they ever gave in return. It wasn't malice that drove their taking, it was unconscious hunger, a reflex to consume comfort without cultivating contribution. But now, watching you recalibrate your worth, they've begun to examine their own habits through a different lens. Their old ways of relating feel foreign now, unacceptable, even. They're coming to terms with how much of their connection to others was built around absorption, not reciprocity. And they know that if they ever stand before you again, it won't be with empty hands and polished words. It'll be as someone who finally understands what it means to truly offer. There comes a point where intention is no longer enough. What matters is how that intention reshapes behavior. And the one who once moved through your life taking more than they gave has begun to understand that truth. They now know that returning to your orbit won't be granted by declarations or promises. It will require proof. Not performance. Not apology. Proof. So they've been quietly shifting how they show up in the spaces they already occupy. They're learning to feel when the scales tilt too far in one direction, and instead of waiting to be corrected, they're self-adjusting. This isn't about people-pleasing or guilt, it's about honoring the balance that nourishes both sides. And they've tasted something new, connection without calculation. It feels nothing like their old dynamic of give to get. It's cleaner, realer, and it's changing them. All of this is part of something much bigger, something you didn't plan but now carry. What started as an inner alignment has become an energetic field strong enough to disturb the unconscious patterns of anyone who enters it. You've become a disruptive presence, not by force, but by existing in integrity. And that energy does something irreversible to others. Some recalibrate and rise with it. Others step back, unable or unwilling to dissolve the illusions that still hold them together. But no one leaves untouched. No one stays neutral. Because your field doesn't allow for fakeness to breathe. This isn't just interpersonal evolution, it's collective recalibration. You're part of a quiet momentum that doesn't scream on stages or trend online. It's slower than a movement but deeper than a trend. It lives in conversations behind closed doors, in sudden awakenings sparked by casual truths, in the subtle unraveling of inherited roles and outdated scripts. It's not about calling the world out. It's about living in such clear resonance that those still pretending are forced to confront whether their masks are worth the wait. And that kind of honesty, it spreads without sound. It multiplies in silence. It rewires everything. There's a moment in every transformation where silence gives way to shape, and the path that once felt fragmented begins to crystallize. This, right here, is that moment. Not because something flashy happened, but because the quiet alignment within you has become undeniable. The doubts that used to linger are no longer in charge. The need for approval has loosened its grip, and the voice that was once buried beneath external noise has taken root in your decisions, your boundaries, your presence. The threads that once felt scattered, your insights, your instincts, your past missteps, they've all converged into something unshakable. This isn't the end of your journey, but it's a marker. The place where your life stopped orbiting around what others thought and began to orbit around what you knew. Those who once kept their distance because they couldn't handle your clarity are slowly returning, not because you've softened, but because they're finally craving what you've embodied. The direction they once avoided is now the only road that makes sense. And you're not chasing anyone. You've simply become the destination their truth can finally recognize.